Good afternoon and welcome to Fish Hawk Live. We are on the air this afternoon and we are with Captain Craig Sleeman and he's visiting us from New York. Captain Craig, how are you doing today?
Hey Chris, thanks. I appreciate you putting this together here these last couple of days. We're in windy upstate New York right now, and unlike you guys out there in that Midwest section, we're fighting to try to get some ice season. And we had a little teaser last week, and then we got some 60-degree temps here this last weekend, and now here comes the wind, but here come the temps. So it looks like we might have an ice season, after the first of the year here. So we're faring well, but these guys around here, we could really use some ice for some of these guys to get out there and get on the hard water.
Yeah, it's a balmy 20 degrees here right now. We've got about 8, 9, 10 inches of ice out there right now. And this weekend, we've got temperatures highs in 5, 6 degrees Fahrenheit. And that should help build some more ice and hopefully get to the point where I can drive my trailer out of the ice. I'd like to do a little ice camping in the Yeti here real soon. Craig, we want to have you on today. We're going to talk a little bit trolling. I know it's January. It's 2025. I think people are probably starting to look forward to getting out on that open water, out and doing a little walleye fishing, out doing a little salmon fishing. We're going to talk some walleye with you. First of all, tell me a little bit about the ports that you like to fish out of Lake Erie for walleye trolling.
Yeah, absolutely. So, where I reside, I'm probably about an hour from Buffalo, so the eastern basin of Lake Erie. We fish a lot in Dunkirk, Cattaraugus Creek, all the way down into Pennsylvania. And, obviously we did go ahead and we gave it a big shot. And one of our New York State boys won the fall brawl down there on the western basin. But, generally speaking, I fish in that deeper eastern and central basin. So, our trolling does end up, probably sometimes midsummer in that 50, 60, 70 down over 100, 120. So it ends up turning to be a little more like salmon fishing, if you will. But our ports that we enjoy fishing out of are bringing in some big hitters this year. And in fact, Dunkirk is going to host one of the NWT events, which will be the fourth and final qualifier of the 2025 season. So we're starting to put the place on the map a little bit more. Port Clinton and the Western Basin, yes, they get all the hype for a lot of the fish, but our fishing is really good, and we are seeing a big return on, some of our, we'll call it local rehabilitation areas and places where we're getting some spawn returns. So it is looking up. It does say that this year the numbers seem to be down a little bit for the hatch, but we've got such strong classes of hatch in these last, 2015 to 17, 19, if you will. And it looks like the numbers are going to be good again this year for mature fish. So, on average, we catch, 3 to 5 pound fish. And if you can find those 7 and 8 pounders, you're going to have a really successful tournament season. So, yeah, generally the Eastern Basin.
Yeah, those fish move. Can you talk a little bit about the migration and just how the fish move throughout the lake and when they get to your area?
Yeah, I mean, again, having a few local fish, we do have a few, areas where we can go pick on them early season, but it just generally seems like that Western Basin is such a sanctuary for just great breeding. So understanding that, that shallower, warmer water with that structure around Kelly's and the reef complex on that Western Basin does allow for the migration to kind of set up there over the winter. Now, come, usually March and April when that spawn and that full moon come full swing and those water temperatures start to raise, it seems like these fish generally make their way to the east, landing somewhere in that Pennsylvania line, Ohio line area sometime around early June. And then into July and August, it's mayhem over here between Dunkirk and the Cattaraugus Creek. So, as we get closer and closer to Buffalo and that water starts to warm, they'll start working their way back. But generally speaking, that migration starts early spring on that Western Basin. And by mid to late summer, we've got a pretty good chunk of fish. And, talking to Jason Robinson over here at the New York State DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation, they do a ton of studies and picking his brain about where these fish are, where they go. It just seems like we get about, 40% of that migration all the way up here into New York.
Yeah, it's really nice to have those kind of fish come back to you in the fall. And tell me a little bit about how you target them. What does your program look like? When will that NWT tournament be?
Yeah, so it looks like August 6th and 7th, I think, are the dates on the NWT. And, that tournament, depending on we'll call it boundary or where they're going to set, as far as we're able to run, we'll call it the fence. 2 years ago in the championship, Johnny Hoyer actually took his casting game all the way up to Canada and ended up winning the tournament there. But, we were still competitive in a top 10 in that championship in 22, with our trolling techniques, literally out in that 100 to 120 feet of water, with our fish down in that thermocline somewhere between 40 and 60 feet. So, generally speaking, the most popular way to catch them over here in the Eastern Basin because of our depth range is lead core. And a lot of our captains that we work with here, are on that, 5 to 10 color range because those fish are in that 25 to 50 and even beyond. So a lot of guys are segmenting lead core. We do use a lot of weighted steel and copper, but, another very efficient way to catch our fish is also with a dipsy diver. And so, understanding where your lures are and where your speeds are, where your temps are can be a really deadly combination, having dipsies, lead core, and some of those, even downrigger techniques like you would see on that salmon market. So, we do catch them a number of different ways, but, right now that seems to be the most popular way to catch them.
With that many rods in the water, fishing a bunch of different ways between, dipsies, potentially downriggers, if you're running lead core, if you're running copper. Tell me a little bit about rod management. How do you keep all those rods from turning into a big mess? I'm sure you're running a ton of boards. Also, if anybody has any questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments and we'll get Craig to answer some questions for you. But tell me a little bit about rod management and how you manage all those rods.
Yeah, I know, especially in our small boat. I mean, we don't have that big Tierra like you'd see on some of those bigger Great Lakes and some of those bigger captains. We actually run a Ranger 621. And, with that beam length and width, I should say, only about 9 feet, it is tough. But, our setup generally starts with having some rod trees and being able to spread out our offshore tackle boards. And, it's funny, there's a number of different ways that guys like to run weighted devices, whether it's snap weights or whether it's lead core or copper. And, seems to me in the last few, outings, we've been kind of experimenting with length of line that's out either on the outside. And some guys will say, well, let's put our shortest shallow here on the outside. And some guys say, let's put them on the inside. And so we kind of toy with that a little bit. And generally speaking, if I'm going to fish, a segmented lead core system, I would generally start with my 3 color, let's say on the very outside, because it's going to be my shortest length, depending on my lure that I select. It could be anywhere from that 15 to 18 feet range. And then if I went to another color on the inside of that actual segmented lead core, I would probably increase it by at least 2 colors to get that variance and making sure that that 3 color could slide over the top of that 5 color. So I would probably run odd numbers of colors on one side, maybe a 3, 5, 7, 9. And then on the opposite side, maybe I'd go to a 4, 6, 8, and 10, and which again would give me enough clearance so that when a fish does engage with that lure and take it back behind the boat, I can actually physically bring that lure up into the chute. And that kind of brings me back to releasing boards. A lot of guys have that, idea that maybe releasing a board would allow for that board to, instead of fighting, that wake and working its way back away from the boat and fighting a fish, we actually do release our boards. And I know Offshore Tackle came out with some different releases here in the last few years, but, it just seems like the efficiency of segmenting your lead core or your copper, or again, we use weighted steel from Torpedo. Those guys have come up with some different legs that are pre-terminated. And so I would generally set my lighter or higher lures lengths probably on the outside and then build that valley as it comes down in towards either a rigger or, a deep dipsy diver, if you will. So generally speaking, kind of high to low as we go. And it kind of seems to do the trick. And any fish that may come in and also check out some of those deeper lure lengths that aren't maybe as interested in striking, I sometimes get them to come up and out as they feed towards those higher lures. Sometimes we'll probably catch a fish, as it's starting to leave the spread. So I try to build that little valley. And once they're in there, I try to trap them in and game on from there.
Tell me a little bit about what you're using for lures. I had an opportunity to fish with you. I don't know, it's probably 6, 7 years ago now. It's been a while, but we were using worms that day. Are you a stick bait guy? Are you mostly a worm guy? Tell me about what you like to pull.
Yeah, I mean, back to my roots, learning from the late Bob Henton, who was a PWT guy and NWT guy back in the day from Pennsylvania. He taught us and we used this when you were out here, Chris, was the inline weight program from Mikey over at I1 Baits. And we were using, variants of 1 ounce and 2 ounce inlines. And, I love pulling worms, especially over structure. Seems like as of late, that worm bite is really, really good early season. And then as the temperature starts to increase, as we start to increase our temperature and that stratification of that water really starts to set up, seems like the guys that troll fast with stick baits seem to kick our butt. So we usually, generally speaking, start with our worms in that June, early July timeframe. And then as it starts to kind of move towards that warmer water, we're talking more, in that 2 to 2.5 mile an hour range, we'll generally pull more stick bait. So I kind of do a little bit of mixing and matching. But man, this last year, we did have some good structure bites going early season, and in those 15 to 30 foot ranges along the rock sand transition, we caught some, probably 2 or 3 fish this year over 30 inches in that range in the beginning of June, which, on my worm harnesses, pulling them nice and slow at, anywhere from 1 to 1.5, and then a little bit of bottom bouncing in there too. We've been real lethal here in the last couple of years, especially early season, pulling those worms, in that cooler temperature water, probably in that 60 to 65 degree range when I start to gravitate towards the worms as that starts to transition into summer. But yeah, I mean, a little bit of mixing and matching. A lot of times the fish will tell us what they want, and it's real hard to put a dipsy down even in late July without a worm on it. So generally speaking, I pull worms on my dipsies as well with a size 4 category willow leaf blade if you can, and mix it with the right color bead pattern, especially out by us. A lot of watermelon, a lot of purple. That time of year, and even this year, we struggled to catch fish, on some of those warmer colors, the reds and oranges like we used to, but found that green was a really good pattern for us. So, yeah, I mean, mix and match of both. But as that water temperature starts to rise, I think we start to speed up. We'll gravitate towards those stick baits.
Yeah, you talked about that willow blade, but how do you decide on blades? What you're going to use? What size? What shape? When you're getting ready to set your harnesses, what are you kind of thinking about as you're deciding what you're going to put out?
That's a great question because, I learned from our buddy over there at Big Water Fishing, old Ross. He taught us back in an early age. And, I owe a lot of credit to him. It wasn't color to start with. It was more the shape and size of blade. And, with that being said, if I'm pulling a much slower presentation, sometimes even some of those Dutch fork butterfly blades early season, at that 0.8 to 1.2 seem to do the trick because it takes less force to get them to spin. So, a lot of times I'll take that smaller Colorado blade and a size 4 or even size 5 in some of those slower presentations. And then even a hatchet blade, at that time with just a little bit different thump, a little bit different vibration, can attract a fish or get a fish to strike. So I'll experiment a lot of times with size and shape first before I go change over to color. But especially when that water's slick, when I get a really slick day and it's super hot and buggy, and, most of the people on the boat are like, listen, if it's noon and we've got our limit, let's get out of here. And I'm like, we can stay the rest of the day and fish this off. And the bugs are starting to move in because of that lack of wind. I'll generally downsize my blades to something smaller with that more finesse looking bite. So a lot of times, again, size and also shape before coloring that. But again, like we said, we get up over 2 miles an hour straight to that willow blade we go. And it seems to do the trick as far as bait, relationship, as far as later in the summer, the size of that bait is starting to enlarge, but also the speeds that we're fishing at. So that can dictate for sure.
All right, Craig, tell me, you brought it up a couple different times in the last few answers, it's speed, and you're using the X2 on your boat. Can you tell folks a little bit about how that works and how you utilize it to catch fish?
Yeah, absolutely. And, going back to my championship this year, using that X2 unit was an integral part. It was a huge part of understanding lure speed. Now, we all pay attention to, Seagull apps and some of those NOAA apps that have, temperature and current. And the fortunate part about having that X2 in my boat this year is that I learned more about surface current versus subsurface current. When we're down there in that 40 to 60 foot range below the surface, that current can be a completely different direction. And even though the map a lot of times only shows surface current, I'm learning that wind direction, depending on structure relationships, we fish a ton of structure with walleye compared to salmon. And so I'm seeing some of these rotational movements with the way that water's coming in and going off of a break wall or off of a rock structure. And so with that X2, I'm able to not only tell my temperature, which is obviously super important, but my speed. And this year, my boat was probably in that, my surface speed over ground was probably in that 2.5 mile an hour range. And I could hardly get my lures up to 2 miles an hour. And it seemed like once those lures hit that 2 miles an hour, especially in the championship at Huron, where I was running a leg course segmented program out in that deep water, and those guys were trying to jig in 5 and 6 foot waves. I put them to shame with that additional knowledge and kind of building that scaffolding of, what are the aspects and what do I need for these fish to get to bite? And 2 mile an hour was kind of that magic time frame and that magic speed. And, again, going back to time frame, it was late August, early September. So, those temperatures were probably the max they were going to be at that time. And they were kind of working their way back into that fall transition. So, having that X2, running it off the side of my Ranger, it was an integral part of the success of catching some of those 4 and 5 and sometimes 6 pound fish, out on that Huron system. So super, super big part of this. And, we always have that thing in the boat, whether we're in 20 to 30 feet of water out to that 130 feet of water, it definitely plays a major role.
Can you tell people a little bit? We're still getting questions from people like, how do you deploy it? How do you deploy your X2? And the new lithium series is called the Multi. And I saw you did a video not too long ago, Craig, and we got to get you a lithium series probe. I didn't realize you didn't have one. So that's the magic of and the beauty of the system, especially if you've got the X2, is going to the lithium series. All you need is a probe, and you don't have to do anything. You don't have to rewire anything. Just pop it on and go. So we got to get you a lithium probe sent out to you.
Yeah.
But just tell me a little bit about how you deploy your X2 when you're fishing.
Yeah, thank goodness that was a little earlier video, but Trevor snuck me one for that championship, and it made a huge deal because I did have some technical difficulties with some battery issues that I had to deal with myself. But again, it's it's on a smaller rod and reel, so Fishhawk does make that shorter, more, we'll call it rigid, or that heavier duty rod it's short, and I actually put it on just a simple Okuma line counter, and with 50-pound braid, I'm able to deploy that with, anywhere from a 1 pound. I've got a 1 pound torpedo weight on the bottom of it, and right off the side of the boat it goes. And with that, I can also throw in, the transducer, which is reading that language that's coming back from that X2 and allowing that probe to send it temperature and speed. So I put it in a rod holder. I just designate one rod holder off the side of the boat at the cockpit. That way it's nearing and I can see what's going on with that temperature and speed. And so it's a real simple application. And, you don't need a downrigger for the X2. And that's the nice thing about it. With some of these smaller boats, we rarely put our downrigger on unless our fish are out over that 100-foot water. So, super easy application. And thank God Trevor hooked me up because I was able to recharge that sucker every night on the little pad. And, man, I'm super excited about it for 2025 because it was an integral part of that success.
Yeah, the X2, the Multi, if you've got a smaller boat, you don't have downriggers, it's definitely the way to go, especially if you want to get out there and troll for those walleyes out over a little bit deeper water. Tell me a little bit about your season on the NWT last year, Craig. I know you had a really, really great season, but some ups and downs. Tell me a little bit about how that went for you.
Yeah, I mean, 4 tournaments, spread out over the year is tough for me. I've got a full-time job. I'm an educator here in upstate New York, and sometimes getting that time off and being able to practice and spend the time necessary to learn a new body of water can be challenging, at the least. So, started out home waters of Lake Erie, unfortunately, on the Western Basin, where I don't know as much as I should. And man, just that home water curse, understanding that, fish were moving on the daily, and we really struggled in that first tournament, but, picked it back up and really set ourselves apart and said, we're going to make this top 40, knowing that the top 40 get invited to that championship. And this year being in Huron, or Lake Huron, if you will, over by Saginaw Bay, was, again, something I was really trying to build my whole season around, was to get to that top 40, qualify, get invited to that championship, and then hopefully perform well there. And, off to stop number 2. And, a lot of these places that we learn, I'm telling you, it's something that opens your eyes every time you see a new body of water. You learn something new, either from someone or, just an experience that you're going to have. And, we fared pretty darn well in the Mississippi River. We actually cast a check, and, these no-call tournaments where you cannot return a fish back into the water from your live well. Once you keep that fish, that's your fish to weigh in, can make it really difficult, especially with the slot limit. We've got under 20-inch fish and we've got over 20-inch fish. And luckily some fish came in the right order. And if I'd have made a little bit better decision, I think we could have had a top 10 there and really catch a big check. But, just to get those valuable points in that top 25 each and every tournament to make that top 40 was what we were after. And, onto another tough bite, trying to find a place, to catch a fish in Green Bay, Wisconsin is just like, especially during that alewife hatch can be very, very challenging. And so, we struggled to catch fish throughout practice, and a lot of guys did. Some of the big heavy hitters came in with 1-2 fish for the entire tournament. And, our goal was to go ahead and catch 3 per day, which was our limit. And we ended up doing that. We were one of 10 anglers in that 120 field to bring in a limit, 2 days in a row. And so we pride ourselves on just, being around that top 30, which we were again, moving into the 4th and final event, which is out in North Dakota. So, Lake Sakakawea, a place that I've never fished, found a really good bite and was able to get close to even cash and check there. So another top 40 finish. So, taking that average, put us in about, 30th, I think 31st or so, got us into that top 40, and off to Huron we go for that championship. And, that's a place where you didn't get any help. I couldn't have a co-angler, was unable to get information from any of the locals, couldn't make a phone call, could only kind of act within the alliance. And my friend Dylan Nussbaum and I kind of got together and said, let's try to break this place down. And, it came down to, that understanding that the conditions in Lake Huron that time of year were ever changing. We had a ton of change in water temperature. We had a change in water current. And, when you get out in 5 and 6 foot waves in Huron, they're like Jersey barriers around here. They're made out of concrete. And we did some serious damage to the Ranger this year for sure, coming back on day one. But, putting together that trolling bite against all those other jigging guys and having that top 5 success, it ended up 4th overall, in that championship, and, cashed a heavy check, kind of paid for the whole season, was an integral part of just understanding, logistics of trolling, understanding where your baits are, understanding your speed of your bait, understanding the temperature of where your baits are, reading your electronics. Some of those fish out in Lake Huron, when it's that clear, you can't see them on electronics. They just don't exist. And, just having the confidence and putting together that trolling program in that 5 and 6 foot swell, and bringing back a limit of 5 fish per day, all 3 days in a row at an average of 18 pounds, cashed us a pretty good check. And so super proud of that. And again, a big shout out to Fish Hawk and, you guys for putting together a piece of equipment that really was helpful in putting that together.
Tell me, you talked about going out to Sakakawea, a place that you'd never fished before. How do you go to a place like that that's kind of different? It's a part of the Missouri River, and it's a different piece of water. How do you break that down as someone who's completely new to it?
Yeah, I mean that's the big struggle, and I'm referring to my phone here on Navionics, and the sleepless nights when you wake up thinking about things you should try or places you should go, and you spend a lot of time on the map, and trying to find some key areas in that pre-trip planning, trying to understand where a fish potentially gotten caught previously, and what does it look like moving forward? What are the temperatures going to be? What is the wind direction going to be? Where does the bait do? Do these fish actually migrate, which they do, from that Van Hook arm? And when things get warm, they go to that deeper water. And so, a lot of this information has to be kind of thought through, but prior to even driving the 1,600 miles in 24 hours with your boat in tow and, going through $1,000 in gas out and back and putting that all together. But, a lot of that is pre-trip planning and just kind of doing some research on your own, talking to other fishermen that live out there and trying to get some information. But then once you're there, understand that Sakakawea's got more, we'll call it coastline than the state of California. And so that being that vast and that large, trying to narrow some fish down. I mean, right away you can pull out of the launch and catch 14 to 16 inch fish, but we knew that 25 plus was going to be the 5 you needed to win this thing and, to even be competitive. So, hunting those back coasts, finding a shallower bite, finding a deeper bite, trying to put those two things together. And then all the ingredients on game day, what changes the morning you head out when you pull boat number 125 of 127, all the spots that you found on the way down are getting covered up by guys because they also found fish there too. So, it comes down to decision making. It really comes down to, can you think on your feet when you are there and what you're seeing and what the fish are telling you? And again, reading your electronics, having forward facing and understanding what fish look like. And, there's paddlefish, there's carp, there are whitefish, there are sheephead. I mean, there's a vast amount of fish that are in there, and, identifying the right species to cast at or troll by, understanding what those schools look like, was an integral part as well. So, I would say using and trusting electronics and a lot of pre-trip planning.
Yeah, you just got to find a paddlefish sized walleye for your tournament. You'd be in pretty good shape.
We would love
Um,
them.
Tell me a little bit. You've brought up today and before the fact that you're a teacher by trade. Do you think that there are skills from that job that translate to what you're doing out on the NWT?
Yeah, I think having just an open mind and being able to work together with a team. I work together with 25, 26 students in every class, and I've got 5 classes a day. And, I've got a great traveling group, between Wayne Van Dyke, and I've got Ed Stahusky and Brett Gilbertson. And now, adding on another guy, Lee Gould this year is being able to work together with others is a huge part of the success, because you can't do this by yourself. And, I owe a big part of it to, my traveling co-angler, Mike Urema over here from Syracuse. And, I think that, and understanding problem solving with that, they've got some problems they're trying to solve. We've got problems we're trying to solve. I mean, you get out there and a battery's dead, or a trolling motor quits, or, always having a positive attitude and having a resource, if you will, to fix those issues, because, a season doesn't go by without, something going down or needing a replacement for something, that fails. Can be a big part of the success at the end is making sure you're putting that full program together. So, the teaching aspect of it is, being able to explain to all the other fishermen on my team also of what I'm seeing, illustrating, where I found fish, what was my speed, what was my temp, what was, collecting those data points. And I think we do that very well as educators is, we collect the data at the end of the marking period, and we're able to give ourselves a grade and give our students a grade. And so I think, yeah, it can play hand in hand, but man, it would be nice to have a little bit more time off in those spring tournaments, because it does make it tough.
You brought up some different names. You're fairly new to the NWT, but you've had a couple of really, really strong finishes in the last 3 years in that championship. Do you feel like you're making a name for yourself? Do you feel like people look at you differently now than they did maybe 3 years ago?
Yeah, I think so. And for me, it's again, it's a hobby, it's a passion, it's competitive, being a big lacrosse player in upstate New York. And I was an All-American with my twin brother, Ethan, over here at Nazareth College. Once you kind of get out of the competitive days of NCAA lacrosse and you want to move on to something else, you have to still find something that gets your blood to boil a little bit. And, just seems like that higher competition, and in the local tournaments will do it too. They're very competitive here, as you know, but being at that level and, having conversations with Corey Sprengel and Chase Parsons and Tommy Wynn, and, having those guys come up to you and talk to you as if you were, one of them, and, guys that are doing this thing full time is a really big respect factor that I can't thank those guys enough for giving me that respect. But I think we're starting to earn it more and more. Again, we're learning, this is a constant, lifelong learner, if you will. You're going to be a lifelong student at this game, and, taking the new technology and taking things and watching the shows that these guys put out, and, how they end up finding these fish and how they end up getting those fish to bite. And, all the pieces of this puzzle continuously put itself together. But yeah, we're starting to get there. I think another season or two, if we can stretch it out that far and see how this goes. But, I think where we're getting there, I think we need a little bit more consistency during the year, not just in the championship, but again, it's a very competitive circuit, and there's a lot of big names, the guys that do this all the time. And, just to be considered one of them, I think is pretty special.
One of the other things we wanted to talk to you about today was the upcoming Walleye School at the Greater Niagara Fishing Expo. You're going to be one of the professors, if you will, at that school. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, we've got an opportunity in February, 14, 15, 16, I think somewhere in there. We'll put some dates out here on socials. But, what an opportunity for, any walleye fisherman to come and really get, kind of a brief overview on electronics, on structure, on currents, on wind, on speed, and just basically help your own program, daily. Because I know that 2 days are never the same. I could give a guy waypoints saying, hey, Friday afternoon, I went out and caught my limit of walleyes in 2 or 3 hours right off of this rock pile. And, the guy goes out there on Saturday morning and just cannot put it together. So, understanding what to do next, where did they go? What ingredients can I use to help break this day down and figure out what these fish are doing and where they've gone to. So I think it's more of a problem solving school. I think it's something where even if you've attended in the past, it's going to be, some new information, obviously, but also a good review of some of the past information that maybe you just weren't ready to hear at that point, or maybe you hadn't had that experience. And this last year, you were able to see, oh, wow, I did hear about this, or thought about what their professor said, or what these guys talked about in the class. And then, oh, wait a minute, didn't they say that last year? Or, oh, yeah, I wasn't ready to hear it last year because I had not experienced something like that. So I think it's going to be a great class. I know we've got Lance Valentine and Donnie Rupert from the Eastern Basin. So we'll have a little bit of both. We'll have that kind of brief overview with Lance, and then we'll be able to break some areas down, give you guys out some waypoints, understand, what the fish are doing on our end of the world. But, in general, for the I think it's $19 to spend, a Friday night with a happy hour and a really good DEC breakdown of what's going on in the area and the different hatches and things that they're seeing scientifically, along with a big day on Saturday, and then a kind of a nice breakdown on Sunday morning for 3 days for $100. I mean, you're going to get your money's worth for sure. And, this being the third year that we've done this, we've had a really good return on our investment with some of our students coming back and saying, man, we've really increased our fish catch. We've done much better in some, local tournaments, and the things that we've covered in the class have been very beneficial to their program. So something to definitely check out for sure. We'll put that link up, and definitely get signed up, because I know seats are limited, and we were getting closer as we were talking about it last week.
Yeah, it's 3 full days. We're not talking about, sitting down for an hour. I mean, you guys really get into the nuts and bolts of things. And like you said, I mean, it's something that I actually talk about with my son all the time, is that he'll be like, well, I already read that book. And it's like, well, it means something different to you now, because you've learned things that maybe when you read it before, you didn't understand it all, and now with just your life experiences, you understand. So it's something that even if you've done it before, going back and seeing it just with different eyes, I think can make a big difference. And you can find out information. We got the link there. It's greaterniagarafishingexpo.com, and that's in Niagara Falls. It's in February. You guys will be doing your walleye school. I know there's some spots available still there. The salmon school is sold out. We will also, if you live in Wisconsin or something and you can't make it, we'll be doing our show once again at the Niagara Show. You'll be part of that as well. When you're not doing the walleye school, stop by and hang out with us in the booth. So we'll be doing our live show from the Greater Niagara Expo once again this season, and we really look forward to that. Craig, is there something I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about today?
I think that, the biggest thing that everybody asks me is, if they are, even thinking about competing, thinking about putting together a team of guys, a couple of guys that want to go and tackle a local tournament, how does somebody go about doing that? And I always say the word commitment. That's a big thing right now is building these successful teams. I'm lucky because I have my twin brother. I've got a really great friend of mine, Jeff Maskalinski from Buffalo. And now Ethan's son is becoming of age. His name's Fisher, quote unquote, as you can tell, it runs in the family. But, constructing a team is difficult. We've had a lot of drama in the fishing world with, teams and putting together guys that want to commit. And that word commitment keeps coming up. And if you can find a couple of guys that really want to commit to the success of the team, not only pull their weight financially, but pull their weight, with helping out with the boat, pulling their weight, preparing, setting up these lines, putting – making sure that all things are calibrated, changing out hooks in the off season. It's a really tough thing to do. And so I'm just, I'm in that mode of like, I could write an article, being in sports my whole life and being around the fishing world for the last 15, 20 years now is, how to construct the perfect team. And I think it all comes down to commitment and just finding guys that want to commit to this passion and have the same success. And, the boat needs one captain and it needs 3 mates. It can't all be captains. And I'm seeing that more and more as we go through this is, just be very careful who you select, for that team. But man, at the end of the day, please extend a hand to somebody that may not have a boat. Take somebody fishing. I get involved with a lot of groups of, we have kids with cancer, kids that are just going through, life struggles and things. I take a couple of kids at the end of the year with my school, and I'm able to treat them with a day of, beef jerky and Pepsi after school to go out and catch a few bass on a local Finger Lakes lake. But, even a veteran, thanking a veteran and taking a veteran, I always think is a huge part of this. And, we love sharing this experience and we want to share this with as many people as we can just because we love it so much. But, committing number 1 to your team, and number 2, making sure you take somebody fishing.
All right. He's Captain Craig Sleeman from Team Midnight Express. Captain Craig, thanks so much. Looking forward to seeing you here in February.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate you guys. And thanks, Trevor Fishhawk. really outstanding performance this year in 24.
Thanks everybody for watching. We're going to go live again next week. We're not sure on the guest yet, but we will have a guest, and we'll see you next week. Take care.